quote more. All right, it's recording. So welcome again. My name is Jean, and I'm so excited to have the editors, Andrea, Abi-Karam, and Kate Gabriel, to this incredible new anthology that's out from Night Boat. And we will stick a link in the chat so that you can buy this book directly from them or from your local independent bookstore. The program for today is a little bit different than some of the other readings that have happened, and Andrea and Kay will talk about that. But because we're kind of organizing this with the One Archives, which for those of you who don't know is the largest and oldest repository of LGBT archival materials in the world, we really wanted to extend this moment to think about trans archival practices, the precarity of their histories, the ethical stakes of historical recovery, what it means to do this work to think about the categorization of trans histories, experiences, and movements within historical canons and collections that often erase them. And so to kind of think through these social and political constraints, we're going to be sharing some documentation, literature, film, photography, and ephemera with you alongside readings from contributors to the book who are no longer with us. Bryn Kelly, Leslie Feinberg, Lou Sullivan, and Sylvia Rivera. And I'm so excited to have a set of editors, authors, poets, artists, and filmmakers here with us today to do that work. And so I first just want to introduce Andrea and Kay to share a little bit about this incredible anthology that they have assembled. And Kate Gabriel is a writer, teacher, and organizer. She lives in Queens, New York. And Andrea Abi-Karam is an Arab-American punk poet, performer, cyborg, Leo, currently obsessed with queer terror and convertibles. Interesting. I'd like to know more. So I'm going to turn it over to Andrea and Kay.
Hi, thanks, Jean, so much. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you to you. Thank you to the One Archives. Thank you to everyone who's going to present tonight. Andrea, what do we want to say?
Yes, thank you, Jean, and thank you everyone for coming, and to all the presenters. When we were thinking about putting together this anthology, from the beginning, we pretty much knew that we wanted to include work from estates and our beloved ancestors who are no longer with us, and some friends who are no longer with us. And so this event feels really special to be able to enliven everyone's work. And we're going to see some photos and some footage and some handwriting. And I'm just really excited.
Yeah, and I mean, just fleshing out that historical picture a little bit, you know, so I mean, we had a number of motivations for putting the book together, and you can find those if you sort of read the introductory essay, which is in the book itself. It's also online. It was published independently on LitHub. And so we can talk about that, especially maybe at the end, once we've started to hear from, you know, once we've gone through the presenters. But to talk specifically about the archival pieces, one thing that was very important to us is linking this current moment of trans radicalism together with prior moments of the same. So kind of deepening our historical sense of what's going on, understanding that we are linked in this pretty long history. And kind of using that to enlarge our sense of radicalism, of struggle, and also of how poetry presents a way to think about those things. Yeah.
And also knowing full well that language like adapts and shifts and mutates, and a lot of the poetics that we're interested in investigate that, and seeing works that are talking about similar moments of struggle and revolution and uprising and resistance being spoken about in different ways using different terminologies, also like an important piece of this kind of like historical linkage.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's everything that I wanted to say by way of an introduction. So I don't know, I mean, unless Andrea has anything further, maybe Jean, we can start introducing folks.
Yeah, let's do it. We've got a full program, so let's do it.
Okay, so as Kay mentioned, there's going to be a little time at the end of this this reading for folks to put questions in the chat or have a little bit of a conversation. So think about if you'd like to do that. And we are going to start with our first set of readings from Lou Sullivan. And so Joan, can you cue up? And our readers are going to be Ellis Martin and Zach Ozma, who are the co-editors of the Lou Sullivan Diaries. Let me get it to show you this beautiful book. Ellis Martin works on the inner seas of art and archives, and Zach Ozma is a social practice artist, sculptor, interdisciplinary artist, and Zach and Ellis take it away.
Hi, thank you so much for having us. Thank you, Kay and Andrea, for this beautiful, beautiful collection. So happy that Lou is in it, along with so many other absolutely amazing voices. We have a short section, and we also, to share with you, Zach and I are going to alternate reading, and then we have some photos. The first image that you'll see is his first diary ever. And we will go through some more moments in the diary, some photos of Lou throughout his life. So thanks for being here. My God, when he stands so near me, I feel like I'm going to be burned as if he brushes against me. I can hardly hold myself back from taking hold of him. He looks like he tastes good. He smells good. I said I was very complimented he came over. He said he's real lonely lately. I debated with myself whether to give him Swinburne's Fragoletta, but decided against it at this time. No need to rush anything. We're having a 4th of July cookout on the roof. I just told him I got into a real poetry reading mood after everyone left from the party. We drank tea and talked. He sees me watching him and pretends he doesn't, and then he decides to give in and looks me right in the eye and laughs. Why is he always teasing me? Will I ever be able to kiss him? I wonder if this isn't all fantasy land, or after some point, he'll actually let me give him some of the physical pleasures he's craving so bad, but once from a true blue female. Those 20-year-old hormones. Fragoletta, too gushing, too physical. I instead found A Leave Taking by Swinburne.
So I did it. I gave him the poem. He immediately opened it in front of everyone and asked me, "What does this mean for you?" I answered, "It's a love poem." He began reading it and asked what it meant. I said, "It says it all there, better than I could say it." He said, "Then you're putting yourself down." I said, "Don't read it here." He said, "I want to talk with you about this at your place." I was so shocked and nervous. I said, "What?" He repeated it. "Come hence, let be, lie still. It is enough." He asked who wrote it. I said a turn of the century English poet. Suddenly, we were alone in the room, and I said, "What did you want to talk about?" He's sitting in an easy chair. I'm standing. He says, "What do you feel inside for me?" I answered, "I think I love you." He asked why. I thought a second, recovering from his question. So blatant, so cutting, so disbelieving. I said, "Because I think about you a lot during the day." A smile came over his lips. He smiled at me and said, "That's nice. Thank you." I suggested we all go to a movie, and he wanted to go get a sweater, I guess, so was going to meet us at the theater. I asked, "Can I come with you, T?" He called back, "Sure, Lou, if you want to." We went to his beautiful, beautiful place. It was like Albion, but more beautiful. He said he built all the wood himself, a loft where he slept. I was enthralled, mystified. He lived there 3 years with a 30-year-old roommate. Suddenly, we were sitting on the floor and talking about some shit, and we lost track of the conversation, and I was gazing into his face, and he asked, "What are you thinking about right now?" I started laughing, fell back on my elbows, and answered, "I was thinking about how beautiful you are." He told me that from the start he felt something special between us, too, and that he liked me a lot and thought we really had something good between us, that he felt really good that I told him how I felt. He said he didn't want to get into anything sexual with me, though. And I said, neither do I. That's what the poem says. We ran together to the movie. I didn't arrange to sit next to him, but there he sat, next to me. If I follow my heart, I'm gonna love you.
He fucking let me kiss him in front of a big group of people, including Kuka. I said, look at this guy. He's an insatiable flirt. Have you no shame? He has no shame, and I have no scruples. He told me he was completely complimented by my attentions. I said you should be, because you really did turn my head. Oh, sweet brat boy, bellyward on my bed. And when the evening was ending, he said Kuka was jealous of me. I asked if she had said something. He said no, but he can just tell. I asked what she was jealous about, and he said, she's afraid you're gonna turn me gay or something. He keeps wearing the same shirt, but it always looks fresh on him, somehow. In certain moments, his hair looks like it could use a shampooing. Thou hast a serpent in thine hair. I asked if he read the poem and liked it. He hedged around, wouldn't be direct. I asked, did you read it? He blurted out, yes, 3 times. And did you like it? Yes, he shouted, his eyes flashing proudly. It seemed like every time he was on his way out, I was on my way in, and we bump into each other in the corridor. In the beginning of the evening, I offered him a joint, and he says, are you trying to get me stoned, Lou? I laughed, I'll try anything. Thank you.
Thank you so much. There's a link in the chat to We Both Laughed in Pleasure, and our, will you advance the slides, Joan? Oh, okay, yeah. So do you want to actually just tell us a little about these slides that are still up?
Yeah, this is from the first edition of Lou's info to the female to male cross-dresser and transvestite or something. I can't remember, I always flip the two. So it was kind of his like informational guidebook and practical guidebook for trans men about how to tips on passing and, you know, kind of like social info. And this one's just pretty funny because it's, I don't know, it's a trans mask, how to look 30 when you're 30, the perpetual struggle. Yeah, that's what's going on here.
And then this is a beautiful illustration by Mars Hobrecker, who's an interdisciplinary artist who primarily works in tattoos at the moment, who drew this portrait based on one of the earlier photos you saw in the slideshow that I believe was taken by Lou's mom, who helped him rent a tuxedo for a drag ball that he was going to in Milwaukee. And then that's probably my favorite portrait of Lou. This is a scan of a copy of The Advocate. And this image ran along with an article about Lou called Sullivan's Travels.
Thank you so much, Zach and Ellis. And if you don't already have We Both Laughed in Pleasure, I really encourage you to get it. It's a beautiful collection. So this is a photograph, I think, from 1999 of Leslie Feinberg and Minnie Bruce Pratt. And Andrea and Kay are going to read the contribution letter to Theresa that's reproduced in the book. And so we've gathered a number of, oh yes, and there is a free download of Stonewitch Blues. Will you go to the next slide, Joan? I wanted to just share very briefly this project that 2 artists, Nancy Brooks Brody and Russell Perkins, have proposed as a permanent monument to Leslie Feinberg at the LGBT Center in New York. And it's called From Using Leslie's Archive at the Sexual Minorities Archive in Northampton that Ben Powers runs. And it's taking marginalia from Leslie's books in the library, which is reproduced there. to propose these etchings underneath the bottom of the undersides of the parts of the center that have not undergone a renovation, for those of you who know that space. Can you show the next slide? And this is just a description of the project for anybody who's interested in reading more. It's about kind of spaces of margin and in between. And again, it's kind of taken from the margin notes of Leslie's books. And so Noam Parness is here with us. Unfortunately, Ariel Goldberg wasn't able to join us today, but Noam and Ariel curated an exhibition of Robert Giard's photographs, which include images of Leslie Feinberg. And Noam is here to kind of share a little bit about those images. And then also, as we're going through, you'll see a number of images that I pulled primarily from 2 issues of Trans Sisters from 92 and 93 of interviews with Leslie, as well as documentation of organizing from the first Camp Trans in 1994, but also documentation of the protests that began in 92 when Nancy Burkholder was forcibly removed from the festival. And so you can see some of this work as it goes by. There's also there's some great photographs of Leslie and Minnie there, along with Ricky Ann Wilkins in her Transsexual Menace t-shirt. Noam, so we'll go through these a little bit. So there's Ricky Ann Wilkins in the center, Leslie Feinberg, and then Minnie in the hat. And Joan, can you skip to the, this was a great quote, male energy now that it's frighteningly subjective corridor for a security team to patrol. Will you skip it? Oh yeah, just I guess go through these. And then, okay, so here's the contact sheets from the Beinecke Rare Book Room at Yale University of Robert Giard. So I'm gonna ask Noam to join us on screen and share a little bit about them. And Noam is a curator at the Leslie Lohman Museum of Art.
Hi, thanks so much. I'm sorry Ariel can't be here, but I'm happy to humbly fill in on their behalf. Yeah, so these images were taken actually on mine and Ariel's phones at the Beinecke when we were there a year ago doing research for our exhibition, or probably a year and a half ago. And just to give you some context on these contact sheets, so Robert Giard was a photographer who died in 2002, and he embarked on a project called Particular Voices, Portraits of Gay and Lesbian Writers, in which he documented over 600 LGBTQ writers between 1985 and up until his death in 2002. And it was an incredibly laborious project. He would often correspond with people, read their work, come to them and talk to them about their lives and their work. And so these images were taken in 1993 in Jersey City in their home. And in addition to these images, Giard actually journaled for each photo shoot, and which is an incredible archive of memory of the encounters with these authors. And these journals were actually sealed for 20 years and only became available to researchers at the New York Public Library 2 years ago. And so Ariel and I really used those journals to explore the photographic process and what happened both in and outside of the images that became known. So I'm just going to read an excerpt from that journal entry by Robert Giard. Okay. Minnie Bruce Pratt and Leslie Feinberg, Friday, October 93, 11 a.m. I wait down below outside turnstile at Journal Square and see them coming down the stairs, no escalator, holding hands and looking into each other's eyes. MVP, happy. Oh, I should note MVP is Minnie Bruce Pratt and LF is Leslie Feinberg. I should also note that this journal entry, Giard refers to Leslie as she. And just as a heads up, I did not have time to fix that, but I will, Z and here are Leslie's, as from what I understand, preferred, or are Leslie's pronouns. Although someone please correct me if that's incorrect. So LF clearly loves her. LF has a wonderful face, handsome, serious, warm, refined in feature. I like both of them enormously. It's fun being with them. We talk about Outright 93, which was a conference yearly held for writers, for LGBTQ writers. They felt their conversation on gender was a highlight, that people in the audience went from cautious to supportive. Also, Louise Alfaro. LF refers to self as transgender, suggests Kay Bornstein to me. MBP also suggests deaf poet whose thesis she advised. We sit and chat in charming, airy apartment. MBP's boys, one Arabic studies, other queer studies at Duke, where she may be placing her papers. MBP, cramps. I note trips to bathroom. LF massages her feet, points for cramps. What stands out? I note MBP's unshaven legs. LF Rubenesque posterior, as she looks out window. They are so at ease with me and in love with each other, so cooperative with being pictured. I hope I do justice to what they are giving. MBP has a tie on, each shot for first roll or two. LF in utter concentration on camera. MBP continually looks lovingly at LF while MBP is being photographed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Noam. And so Andrea and Kay, you're gonna read?
I think I'm just gonna read from it, or that's what we had planned. So I'm gonna read from Letter to Theresa, which is the opening of Stonebush Blues that we republished in We Want It All. And I wanna shout out Minnie Bruce Pratt for the rights and for just being an amazing person to be in correspondence with throughout the publication of We Want It All. She's super excited about it, and she kind of is just like, it lives on, like, take it away, which is awesome. So, and the spread looks like this, if you all haven't seen it. And thank you, Noam, for the presentation about the photos and the journal entry. Oh my God, so powerful. Dear Theresa, I'm lying on my bed tonight missing you, my eyes all swollen, hot tears running down my face. There's a fierce summer lightning storm raging outside. Tonight I walk down streets looking for you in every woman's face, as I have each night of this lonely exile. I'm afraid I'll never see your laughing, teasing eyes again. I had coffee in Greenwich Village earlier with a woman. A mutual friend fixed us up. Sure, we'd have a lot in common since we're both into politics. Well, we sat in a coffee shop and she talked about democratic politics and seminars and photography and problems with her co-op and how she's so opposed to rent control. Small wonder, Daddy is a real estate developer. I was looking at her while she was talking, thinking to myself that I'm a stranger in this woman's eyes. She's looking at me, but she doesn't see me. Then she finally said how she hates this society for what it's done to women like me, who hate themselves so much they have to look and act like men. I felt myself getting flushed and my face twitched a little, and I started telling her, all cool and calm, about how women like me existed since the dawn of time, before there was oppression, and how those societies respected them. And she got a very interested expression on, and besides, it was time to leave. So we walked by a corner where these cops were laying into a homeless man, and I stopped and mouthed off to one of the cops, and they started coming at me with their clubs raised, and she tugged my belt to pull me back. I just looked at her, and suddenly I felt things well up in me that I thought I had buried. I stood there remembering you, like I didn't see cops about to hit me, like I was falling back into another world, a place I wanted to go again. And suddenly my heart hurt so bad, and I realized how long it's been since my heart felt anything. I need to go home to you tonight, Theresa. I can't, so I'm writing you this letter. I remember years ago, the day I started working at the cannery in Buffalo, and you had already been there a few months, and how your eyes caught mine and played with me before you set me free. I was supposed to be following the foreman to fill out some forms, but I was so busy wondering what color your hair was under that white paper and how it would look and feel in my fingers, drawn loose and free. And I remember how you laughed gently when the foreman came back and said, "You coming or not?" All of us, she's, were mad as hell when we heard you got fired because you wouldn't let the superintendent touch your breasts. I still unloaded on the docks for another couple days, but I was kind of mopey. It just wasn't the same after your light went out. I couldn't believe it the night I went to the club on the west side. There you were, leaning up against the bar, your jeans too tight for words, and your hair all loose and free. And I remember that look in your eyes again. You didn't just know me, you liked what you saw. And this time, oh woman, we were on our own turf. I could move the way you wanted me to, and I was glad I'd gotten all dressed up. On our own turf, would you dance with me? You didn't say yes or no, you just teased me with your eyes, straightened my tie, smoothed my collar, and took me by the hand. You had my heart before you moved against me like you did. Tammy was singing Stand By Your Man, and we were changing all the keys to shoes inside our heads to make it fit right. After you moved that way, you had more than my heart. You had made me ache, and you liked that. So did I. The older butches warned me, if you wanted to keep your marriage, don't go to the bars. But I've always been a one-woman butch. Besides, this is our community, the only one we belong to. So we went every weekend. There were two kinds of fights in the bars. Most weekends had one kind or the other. Some weekends both. There were fist fights between the butch women, full of booze, shame, jealous insecurity. Sometimes the fights were awful and spread like a web to trap everyone in the bar. Like the night Hetty lost her eye when she got hit upside the head with a bar stool. I was real proud that in all those years I never hit another butch woman. See, I loved them too, and I understood their pain and their shame because I was so much like them. I loved the lines etched in their faces and hands and the curves of their work-weary shoulders. Sometimes I looked in the mirror and wondered what it would look like when I was their age. Now I know. In their own way, they loved me too. They protected me because they knew I wasn't a Saturday night butch. The weekend butches were scared of me because I was a stone, he, she. If only they had known how powerless I really felt inside. But the older butches, they knew the whole road that lay ahead of me, and they wished I didn't have to go down it because it hurt so much. When I came into the bar in drag, kind of hunched over, they told me, be proud of what you are. And then they adjusted my tie, sort of like you did. I was like them. They knew I didn't have a choice. So I never fought them with my fists. We clapped each other on the back in the bars and watched each other's backs at the factory. But then there were the times our real enemies came in the front door. Drunken gangs of sailors, clan-type thugs, sociopaths, and cops. You always knew when they walked in because someone thought to pull the plug on the jukebox. No matter how many times it happened, we still went, aw, when the music stopped, and then we realized it was time to get down to business. When the bigots came in, it was time to fight. And fight we did. Fought hard, femme and butch, women and men together. If the music stopped and it was the cops at the door, someone plugged the music back in and we switched dance partners. Us in our suits and ties paired off with our drag queen sisters in their dresses and pumps. Hard to remember that it was illegal then for two women or two men to sway to music together. When the music ended, the butches bowed and our femme partners curtsied and we returned to our seats, our lovers, our drinks to await our fates. That's when I remember your hand on my belt up under my suit jacket. That's where your hand stayed the whole time the cops were there. Take it easy, honey. Stay with me, baby. Cool off. You'd be cooing into my ear like a special lovers song sung to warriors who need to pick and choose their battles in order to survive. We learned fast that the cops always pulled the police van right up to the bar door and left snarling dogs inside so we couldn't get out. We were trapped, all right. Remember the night you stayed home with me? I was so sick. That was the night, you remember. The cops picked up the most stone butch of them, all to destroy with humiliation. A woman, everyone said, wore a raincoat in the shower. We heard they stripped her slow in front of everyone in the bar and laughed at her, trying to cover up her nakedness. Later she went mad, they said. Later she hung herself. What would I have done if I had been there that night? I'm remembering the bus and the bars in Canada, packed with police vans. All the Saturday night bitches giggled and tried to fluff up their hair and switch clothing so they could get thrown in the tank with the femme women. Said it would be like dying and going to heaven. The law said we had to be wearing 3 pieces of women's clothing. We never switched clothing. Neither did our drag queen sisters. We knew, and so did you, what was coming. We needed our sleeves rolled up, our hair slicked back in order to live through it. Our hands were cuffed tight behind our backs, yours were cuffed in front. You loosened my tie, unbuttoned my collar, and touched my face. I saw the pain and fear for me in your face, and I whispered it would be all right. We knew it wouldn't be. I never told you what they did to us down there. Queens in one tank, stone butches in the next, but you knew. One at a time, they would drag our brothers out of the cells, slapping and punching them, locking the bars behind them fast in case we lost control and tried to stop them if we could. They'd handcuff a brother's wrist to his ankles or chain his face against the bars. They made us watch. Sometimes we'd catch the eyes of the terrorized victim or the soon-to-be caught in the vise of torture. And we'd say gently, I'm with you, honey. Look at me. It's okay. We'll take you home. We never cried in front of the cops. We knew we were next. The next time the cell door opens, will it be me they drag out in chains, spread eagle to the bars? Did I survive? I guess I did, but only because I knew I might get home to you. They let us out last, one at a time, on Monday morning. No charges. Too late to call in sick to work. No money, hitchhiking, crossing the border on foot, rumpled clothes, bloody, needing a shower, hurt, scared. I knew you'd be home if I could get there. You ran a bath for me with sweet smelling bubbles. You laid out a fresh pair of white BVDs and a t-shirt for me and left me alone to wash off the first layer of shame. I remember it was always the same. I would put on the briefs and then I'd just put the t-shirt over my head, and you would find some reason to come into the bathroom to get something or to put something away. In a glance, you would memorize the wounds upon my body like a road map, the gashes, bruises, cigarette burns. Later in bed, you held me gently, caressing me everywhere, the tenderest touches reserved for the places I was hurt, knowing each and every sore place inside and out. You didn't flirt with me right away, knowing I wasn't confident enough to feel sexy, but slowly you coaxed my pride back out again by showing me how much you wanted me. You knew it would take you weeks again to melt the stone. Lately, I've read these stories by women who are so angry with stone lovers, even mocking their passion when they finally give way to trust, to being touched. And I'm wondering, did it hurt you the times I couldn't let you touch me? I hope it didn't. You never showed it if it did. I think you knew it wasn't always you I was keeping myself safe from. You treated my stone self as a wound that needed loving, healing. Thank you. No one's ever done that since. If you were here tonight, well, it's hypothetical, isn't it? I never said these things to you. Tonight, I remember the time I got busted alone on strange turf. You're probably wincing already, but I have to say this to you. It was the night we drove 90 miles to a bar to meet friends who never showed up. When the police raided the club, we were alone, and the cop with gold bars on his uniform came right over to me and told me to stand up. No wonder I was the only he/she in the place that night. He put his hands all over me, pulled up the band of my jockeys, and told his men to cuff me. I didn't have 3 pieces of women's clothing on. I wanted to fight right then and there because I knew the chance would be lost in a moment. But I always knew that everyone would be beaten that night if I fought back. So I just stood there. I saw they had pinned your arms behind your back and cuffed your hands. One cop had his arm across your throat. I remember the look in your eyes. It hurts me even now. They cuffed my hands so tight behind my back, I almost cried out. Then the cop unzipped his pants real slow with a smirk on his face and ordered me down on my knees. First, I thought to myself, I can't. And then I said out loud to myself, and you to him, I won't. I never told you this before, but something changed inside me in that moment. I learned the difference between what I can't do and what I refuse to do. I paid the price for that lesson. Do I have to tell you every detail? Of course not. When I got out of the tank the next morning, you were there. You bailed me out, no charges. They just kept your money. You had waited all night long in that police station. Only I knew how hard it was for you to withstand their leers, their taunts, their threats. I knew you cringed with every sound you strained to hear from back in the cells. You prayed you wouldn't hear me scream. I didn't. I remember when we got outside the parking lot, you stopped and put your hands lightly on my shoulder and avoided my eyes. You gently rubbed the bloody places on my shirt and said, I'll never get these stains out. Damn, anyone who thinks that means you were relegated in life to worrying about my rings around the collar. I knew exactly what you meant. It was such an oddly sweet way of saying or not saying what you were feeling, sort of the way I shut down emotionally when I feel scared and hurt and helpless, and say funny little things that seem so out of context. You drove us home with my head in your lap all the way, stroking my face. You ran the bath, set out the fresh underwear, put me to bed, caressed me carefully, held me gently. Later that night, I woke up and found myself alone in bed. You were drinking at the kitchen table, head in your hands. You were crying. I took you firmly in my arms and held you, and you struggled and bit my chest with your fists because the enemy wasn't there to fight. Moments later, you recalled the bruises on my chest and cried even harder, sobbing, It's my fault. I couldn't stop them. I've always wanted to tell you this. In that one moment, I knew you really did understand how I felt in life, choking on anger, feeling so powerless, unable to protect myself or those I love most, yet fighting back again and again, unwilling to give up. I didn't have the words to tell you this then. I just said, it'll be okay. It'll be all right. And then we smiled ironically at what I'd said. I took you back to our bed and made the best love to you I could, considering the shape I was in. You knew not to try to touch me that night. You just ran your fingers through my hair and cried and cried. When we did get separated in life, sweet warrior woman, we thought we'd won the war of liberation. and we embraced the word gay. Then suddenly there were professors and doctors and lawyers coming out of the woodwork telling us that meetings should be run with the Robert's Rules of Orders. Who died and left Robert, God? They drove us out and made us feel ashamed of how we looked. They said we were male chauvinist pigs, the enemy. It was women's hearts they broke. We were not so hard to send away. We went quickly. The plants closed, something we could never have imagined. That's when I began passing as a man. Strange to be exiled from your own sex to borders that will never be home. You were banished too to another land with your own sex, yet forcibly apart from the women you loved as much as you tried to love yourself. For more than 20 years, I have lived on this lonely shore, wondering what became of you. Did you wash off your Saturday night makeup in shame? Did you burn in anger when women said, if I wanted a man, I'd be with a real one? Are you turning tricks today? Are you waiting tables or learning word perfect 5.1? Are you in a lesbian bar looking out the corner of your eye for the butchest woman in the room? Do the women there talk about democratic politics in seminars and co-ops? Are you with women who only bleed monthly on their cycles? Or are you married in another blue-collar town, lying with an unemployed auto worker who is much more like me than they are, listening for the even breathing of your sleeping children? Did you bind his emotional wounds the way you tried to heal mine? Did you ever think of me in the cool night? I've been writing this letter to you for hours. My ribs hurt from a recent beating, you know. I never could have survived this long if I had never known your love. Yet I still ache with missing you and need you so. Only you can melt this stone. Are you ever coming back? The storm is past now. There is a pink glow of light on the horizon outside my window. I am remembering the nights I fucked you deep and slow until the sky was just this color. I can't think about you anymore. The pain is swallowing me up. I have to put your memory away like a precious sepia photograph. There are still so many things I want to tell you, to share with you. Since I can't mail you this letter, I'll send it to a place where they keep women's memories safe. Maybe someday, passing through this big city, you will stop and read it. Maybe you won't. Good night, my love.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Our next reading is going to be of Bryn Kelly. Gaines, are you here? I found this, or did you send me this amazing photo of Leslie and Bryn together from 2006? And we're really happy that Bryn's work is in the anthology, and Gaines, Bryn's partner, is going to read it for us.
Thank you so much. Just to set a little context, Bryn lived in the Midwest in the early 2000s, was born in Ohio, was trans in Ohio and West Virginia and Michigan, where this photo was taken. And it's funny that Mitch Fest is kind of a through line from the last reader to this one. Also because it represents a fun intersection of the internet and real life IRL community for Bryn, because she was hospitality coordinator at Camp Trans for several years and was introduced to Camp Trans and that contemporary trans movement through the website strapon.org, which was an early precedent, I guess, to what we now think Tumblr and other generations of internet trans technology. So when she went to Mitch Fest, she actually knew many people, both from at Camp Trans and from strapon.org, as well as Midwestern lesbians who she knew from gay bars. So it's just a fun intersection. And the piece that I'm reading is from a blog post from her Tumblr blog, which she was writing in one or more several trans voices on Tumblr a decade ago, which I think is interesting for me as someone who is also trans on Tumblr a decade ago to recognize this now as part of our history. So I am dropping us in partway through this piece where Bryn has talked about Adrienne Rich, the lesbian feminist poet who collaborated with TERFs, and also a Lesbians in the 70s conference that she had attended. When I see people posting reverently about Adrienne Rich in the past couple days, it inspires this panic response in me. You are not my friend. You do not have my back. I knew it. I knew you would bail all along and that I could never trust you. And here you are showing your true colors. We are not on the same team. We never were. It is always a lie. Fuck you. I end up feeling this way kind of a lot. My internet cuts a pretty wide swath through a couple different queer communities. And something like this always reminds me of how we are so different and how difference is this gulf between people that can never be totally filled and only shakily bridged, and how all this factors into a fundamental impossibility of communication. It is a bummer. Not to put too fine a point on it, but the people I know who are posting about Adrienne Rich break into two camps. One, people who love trans women and are like, hey guys. And two, people who do not seem to care a whole lot about us, who post uncritical gush. Like, I mean, you would think Whitney up and died all over again. And certainly, though no one is necessarily obliged to care about trans women, I guess, it all just makes me feel more isolated, more alone, more ostracized, more of a pariah, more shame, which are feelings I spend a lot of time feeling anyway. I don't remember what Adrienne Rich said that night at the Lesbians in the 70s conference, but it's on the internet. However, so is a speech that Frances Golden gave the same night. She basically burned the roof down of that place. I will tell you, old radicals are my favorite radicals. I know it's easy to hate on newly fired up, barely post-adolescent revolutionaries, #Occupy, but it really renews your faith to meet people who have spent a lifetime busting ass and busting heads and have won a few rounds with the man. You can really learn a thing or two from these folks sometimes. Do yourself a favor and watch that clip all the way through. It is 8 minutes long, which is like a lifetime in YouTube time, and the sound is patchy, but it's worth it. If you can't manage that, Tumblr generation, let me quote, for instance, some of her concluding remarks. I want to tell you, your life will be made sweet by comrades and friends, and it doesn't come naturally. It takes a lot of work. And the quote proceeds about what this work looks like. It's really beautiful. I recommend you read it. After that quote concludes. Figuring out how to live life together is hard. So this is now Bryn's words again. To exist in community with people who constantly piss you off is exhausting, but ultimately worth it. As Miss Golden says, it is sweet. But in between, there are these things that set our teeth on edge about each other. And we start smiling the kind of smiles that are about baring teeth to each other. We don't let it show that it stings, or we shrug it off like it's no big deal, and we keep a running catalog of hurts in our head and a dossier of every aesthetic, political statement everyone we ever know has ever made in public and index it against our own internal, emotional, safety, actuarial matrices. And sometimes, if we trust you, we send you a text, or give you a call, or whisper to you at a party, or point blank bring it up while we're making you lunch. Hey, did you know you hurt me? Can we talk about that? I think I trust you enough to be vulnerable enough to tell you about this, even though it's going to make me seem like an oversensitive bitch. I suppose that's just how you get through with other people, because the only way to get through it is with other people. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that and bringing Bryn's words into this space. And thank you, Andrea and Kate, for including her. So we're going to have one final presentation by Sasha Wortzel, who is here. And we're going to set up the film. And if you have any questions or thoughts that you want to put into the chat, the editors and speakers can address as this comes to a close, then feel free to do that. And I'm going to introduce Sasha, who is a filmmaker whose many films include This Is an Address, with Tourmaline, Happy Birthday, Marcia. We Have Always Been on Fire, Lost in the Music. And Sasha's gonna share a little bit about the excerpt of the film that we're gonna watch.
Hello.
Hi.
You're not gonna wear your dinosaur sweater?
Oh, snap.
I have a dinosaur
I have
sweater.
to change
Why?
because I have a dinosaur shirt that I could be wearing.
Okay. You need to do that really quickly?
Yeah, 2 minutes?
Yeah. It's not today? I thought it was today. Dad said it was today. I was confused.
I'm going to change.
Yeah, okay. Oh,
I have no clue what that is.
Yeah.
Sasha, do you wanna unmute?
Yeah. Can you hear me? Okay. Sorry, I was trying to unmute. Zoom, the glitch. Hi. Can people see me? Okay, great. It's unclear to me on my view right now. Thanks so much for having me, and it's really an honor to be part of this event. The book is really beautiful. Congratulations to and thank you to all the readers. Just to set up this film, this is an address. About 10 years ago, I was working on a film with the artist Tourmaline, Happy Birthday, Marcia, and she showed me this incredible footage that belonged to Randy Wicker and was filmed in 1995 of Sylvia Rivera living on the Hudson River piers, which on this location that's now adjacent to the Whitney Museum. And that footage really moved me, but it didn't make it into our project at the time. But then 5 years after first encountering that footage, I was hired to work in the education department at a new location of the Whitney Museum that had just opened in the meatpacking district. And on my first day in the office, I looked out the windows of the education department and noticed that I was looking at the Hudson River at the very site where Sylvia had been living 20 years prior and was interviewed in this footage by Randy Wicker. She's living there alongside other queer and trans unhoused folks. People are HIV positive, disabled, and taking care of one another. Meanwhile, while working at the museum, I was watching all this drastic kind of redevelopment of the waterfront, watching this place just transform before our eyes. So I started to document that change. And so the result is this film, This Is an Address, which layers my footage of the meatpacking district in the Hudson River now alongside this footage by Randy Wicker from 1995. And I think we're going to play a 5-minute excerpt, but the film is completely free and available online to watch in full at Field of Vision. So I encourage you to do that. And thank you again for including me in this really beautiful event, celebrating some really important thinkers and writers.
And drawing the beginning of Spawn out in the street, but
they didn't have homeless encampments in those days.
We didn't. We slept in hallways, or either Marshall or I had a hotel room where we snuck everybody in.
Now, does this belong to the city? The
property belongs to the city. It does. The end of my house is the dividing line between that world and our world.
We've been homeless for the most part of 8 years. My lover has AIDS dementia. He's getting to the very serious stage now, the last stage. I was diagnosed in 1985. And so was he when they called it HTLV3, not HIV. We're still alive.
So have you gone to places like GMHC?
Yeah, they've turned me down.
On what basis?
Sometimes I walked in and I said, I'm homeless, I have AIDS, and I need assistance, and they would say, there is no services available for you here. they said you had to have an address. I said, well, I have. It just doesn't have a number.
It hurts to see that people are not being helped. I may spend the winter out here for the simple fact that if I can't see them off the street, why should I go get shelter for myself? I have to prove a point as a Stonewall veteran.
But hurting yourself doesn't do us no good.
Yeah, I'm flabbergasted because I mean I've considered myself very aware on all these AIDS issues.
Gay Community Center, walk right up there and ask what kind of support do you have for
They give away. Well, they give
right down.
I don't think that a lot of gay people ever think of gays being homeless and living, you know, in lean-tos like this.
And we are in the village. And
We're in the middle of the gay gathering.
Right. But they'll see you pushing a shopping cart. They know you're gay because they've seen you around for years, okay? But because you're homeless, suddenly it's because you're bad. You've done something wrong. That's the way they look at you, and they walk away. They turn their back on you. But if they could just understand what we're saying now, that's not the story. There's always someone here watching someone else's camp. We always have that agreement.
We share amongst ourselves.
We can unmute and do some clapping.
Yay.
Thank you so much, Sasha.
Thank you so much, Sasha. And Gaines and Ellis and Zach.
And Noam.
And Noam and Jean and Kay.
And Andrea. And thank you all for coming. And I think that we have some time just to talk amongst ourselves about the various overlaps between these different texts and documents, the relationship between those and the rest of the book. Yeah, I don't really know kind of where to take it from here, but I'm seeing everything really kind of combined at one time. I think is somehow like very productive, actually.
Yeah, we definitely have some time for people to unmute and share. Oh, there's a question. Do Zach and Ellis know if Lou and Leslie ever met or corresponded?
That is a good question. Zach, do we know? I don't think we know.
Not as far as I know, and it seems like something we would have remembered.
Yeah. There's a lot of correspondence, but it's yeah, I have no memory of that.
I think I remember asking you both like a year and a half ago, and you also didn't know that. But that would be a gold mine.
Though to be fair, we, Lou's correspondences were outside the scope of our project, so that isn't a part of the archive where I've personally spent as much time as I've spent with the diaries.
I think they just redid GLBT just redid the finding aid for the collection, Lou's collection there. So I'm sure that if they are there, there's reference too. So it'd be worth checking out if you're interested.
So Leslie Feinberg, Finding Aid for Sexual Minorities, is also very accessible and thorough. I could drop that into the chat.
There was a lot of content presented, so we would love some questions. Also, our various presenters, if you want to ask each other questions, we love that too.
I actually have a question for everyone involved. As a lot of folks talked about earlier, like it's been very important and very amazing to be able to revisit these archives. I feel like at this point right now, where we're finally kind of waking up to the idea that the archive is important, and the trans archive specifically is very important because it's so sparse in terms of like the higher ed stratosphere. I guess my question for everyone involved was, what was it like bringing all of these folks who are incredibly anti-establishment into this kind of collected text? Like a lot of these people in this book would roll their eyes at the idea of a book. And so I'm interested in hearing about how everyone who either curated work or found work or helped in the project itself, how that process was for you to kind of be working with these radical trans narratives and knowing that they're going to be necessary, because even 10 years out, we see that just a simple blog post or, a diary can become so poignant. How are you all working to continue to build on the trans archive while also honoring the legacies of the people who are featured?
I actually have, I think that's a great question. And I have one response. I do want kind of people who are sort of individual archivists to talk about that too. But I think, Leslie Feinberg, I think, is actually someone who I look to as someone who's thinking a lot throughout your work about the relationship between culture and struggle. And you can see that in, for instance, Lavender and Red, which is the column that Leslie wrote for, whatever you think about the party, for Workers' World, and for the Workers' World magazine. So that's a kind of complicated history. We might not all share that same particular tendency. We might not, especially agree with, say, some of the stuff that Leslie wrote about Cuba, for instance. I mean, it's complicated, right? It's historically complicated. But Feinberg is definitely thinking about the book and the journal as ways to work with people and to change a kind of relationship of consciousness, specifically about who is in the movement, right? Also, I think because Feinberg was writing at a moment when the mainstream left in the US between the 70s and the 90s was extremely homophobic and extremely, what we would say now, transphobic. So I think that is, it's kind of, there is a kind of more, I would say, more complicated relationship to the book, if that makes sense. And of course, Stone Butch Blues is a book that they, wrote and published and is, available still to read and download online.
Thank you. Another thing I want to say about the anthology as a book project is we thought a lot about like forms, like poets love to talk about forms, and Stonebush Blues is prose, and the Sylvia Rivera piece that we republished is a speech that she gave called Bitch on Wheels, which is amazing and you should all read it. It's also available for free online in a zine, which is where we found it. And it's one of the speeches that doesn't get a lot of airtime, and it talks a lot about Stonewall and how trans women are always on the front lines fighting, but other types of gays are not, obviously. And it also talks a lot about the interesting economics that were going on at the Stonewall Bar, like between NYPD and the mafia and all this stuff. So you have to read it. And when we were putting together the book, we're putting together a book. Like, we were not putting together like a movement, but it serves its purpose in being important in, as far as like being connective and being agitative. And we really wanted to resist the idea that like poems have to look like poems, which is why I wanted to include works by people that we have learned from and are inspired by.
But maybe, you know, like if Ellis and Zach or Sasha, if you guys want to talk about what you guys, like how you, like if you want to respond to Mason's question and how you relate to doing the archival work and respecting the kind of the positions of the people you work with, like with respect to publication, I'd be curious to know the answer to that too.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thanks, Mason, for your question. I think we and Zach hop on here too. I think that we definitely did a lot of thinking about, you know, like particularly in the moment in which, you know, Lou passed in 91, Zach was born in 92, I was born in 93, and so we had this like lovely kind of crossing of ships and thinking about, you know, we sort of inherited a moment that Lou was right up against, but wasn't actually in. And how do we hold that space and really honor, you know, what he did and how he did it. And yeah, I don't know, Zach, if you want to say some things too.
Well, I think for me, some of Lou's own life practices make it feel easier for me to work with his archive. For one thing, you know, he had like a printing company with one of his boyfriends and would typeset newsletters for multiple organizations. You know, he self-published his own guide that we showed some images from earlier. And I think, you know, and he did all of his correspondences. So I would see Lou's movement work, community work, as being one that was very text-based, whether it was personal or in publications. So, and there's something also about his enthusiasm for publication and like for notoriety for his writing throughout his lifetime, that takes some of the pressure off from me. So I'm curious to see what people who have, you know, worked with an archive that maybe is a little bit more ambiguous in its relationship to publicity have to say. But thanks for your question, Mason.
I can also talk a little bit about working with Bryn's work. And it's interesting because, like I mentioned, there are a couple Tumblr voices that she used, or different writing projects in different voices. And this piece specifically was published under her name, like brynkelly.tumblr. There was other work that after her death, I was sort of like not precious about. It was just like, yeah, this is all Bryn's work. Now it's sort of known under one name if someone cares to look. So this piece in particular, it doesn't feel fraught to include it in a publication. And similarly, given that Bryn was identified as a writer, actually was in other anthologies that she chose to put work in during her lifetime, like that doesn't feel fraught. I think, you know, using, publishing under a name, a pseudonym, doesn't inherently mean that someone doesn't want that work to be collected in this way. I think a lot of Bryn's choices around like forum and genre and using Tumblr in the way that she did came from assuming that the establishment would never be interested in her work, and that she, or you know, her lived experience that the establishment wasn't interested in her work, and that in her lifetime she would have chosen to work. It felt very easy and clear to me that she would have chosen to be included in something like this.
Ted, do you want to say anything about publishing Bryn's writing in We Who Feel Differently? Just you on the spot, tiny bit.
Yeah. I asked Bryn if she was working on anything and if she would be willing to submit something. I was collecting fiction and nonfiction for a publication called We Who Feel Differently, the journal. It's an art project by Carlos Mota. And there was a journal section that I edited, and Bryn said yes. And Bryn deserved a better editor than me, which was really interesting. And I'm sure Gaines has insight into this, but like, I just kind of fangirled. And so every time I read a draft, I was like, it's so good, which for every writer in this room knows that as much as you might want to get positive feedback, there's that feeling right afterwards where you're like, but no, give me some pushback, give me something to work with. Like my first draft was not good, you're lying. And so I think actually in the end, Bryn having to kind of explain things to me helped her make the piece better. I remember meeting her in a coffee shop and her being nervous and me being like, it's so good. And she's like, and then me not even understanding the title. And once she understood how little I understood of it, she rewrote it and it got better for both of us. Yeah, and and I'm really interested in what Gaines said about the space between anonymity and having pseudonyms and just that complex thing. I think like in the HIV world, there's this idea of being AIDS famous. So like you'll be famous in the AIDS world, but that might never translate beyond the world of HIV. And so it's interesting to think about what does it mean to be like poetry famous or trans famous or Brooklyn famous? And how does that work with anonymity and pseudonyms? And how does that change when like the internet is not Tumblr anymore? And that sucks. So I'm thinking about how anonymity online doesn't work as well as it used to. That's what I'm thinking about. Sorry, I'm late and out of breath.
No, that was great. Sasha, I saw you unmuted for a second before. Do you want to talk about your work with Sylvia?
Sure, I guess, yeah, I've been thinking about, I mean, the question of how one works with archives is definitely something that I'm thinking a lot about in my own work. And to answer the previous question a little bit, I think whenever I'm often kind of very interested in how to, rather than sort of fix history, how to kind of mine those gaps for something new altogether, and thinking about this idea that if many institutions and maybe higher education, which was referenced, is not going to document our history or is going to do so in a way that really makes us sort of the object of archives and doesn't include us in the actual imagining of what that archive looks like. I think a lot about just my filmmaking practice is how to kind of create some kind of cinematic language that is both kind of doing that work and honoring and giving back to these people who have really shaped our lives and given so much, but have not gotten their maybe shine or attention or been honored in their lifetimes, especially how to sort of give back to them while also making work that can simultaneously be interrogating why that erasure and that violence occurs, and how to do so in a way where we're not just reproducing that. But I just think there's a lot of power that if our lives and what matters to us and the sort of textures and richness is not being archived, how do we get to kind of reimagine what that past looks like altogether? And how can that tell us new things about what we want to do together now and how we want to care for one another? So yeah, thanks for that question. And I think a lot of the work we're looking at and listening to tonight does just that. So thank you all.
There's a question in the chat, which I can read. It's, how do y'all think trans knowledge and care might be archived, especially in from digital presences, since queerness/transness isn't a monolith? Does digitalness add or take open-ended? And I'll maybe just say a tiny thing about working in an archive, which is that what is there is very much, it's haphazard. It's a kind of a reflection of the kind of segregationist practices that happen in queer culture and in all kind of cultures, but that we're kind of trying to drop some links that have accessible materials, and the Digital Transgender Archive in particular has so much preserved. And what's really interesting about it is that it's kind of drawing from all these LGBT collections, many of which maybe sort of misarchive or kind of categorize or contextualize trans life under other names. And so it's kind of trying to do that work of naming practices and how important that is in terms of historical canons and for our kind of social justice organizing in the present. And we're trying, people are dropping a lot of links, so thank you, but I'll just pose that question to folks.
I can talk a little bit about, it's been really exciting. I mean, obviously the pandemic is awful, but it has been kind of amazing to present the anthology in this way where we can have lots of digital events with big lineups, and hopefully many of them are recorded, to be able to bring people together and then like kind of share these readings rather than it being like limited by geography. And when we're thinking about putting together an anthology, we wanted to include people from all types of geographies. And so being able to present in this way is kind of amazing, even though it's under duress. But I think it will give us something to think about, like if a return to IRL happens, what strategies in sharing and presenting and archiving work that's happening like every day, how can we take those learnings like back into the new world?
And just to follow up on the digital archives too, if that's okay, I think a lot about the digital form as something that can be replicated, and so and to sort of align the instances of unevenness and extreme bias and principles in the archive based on a collecting model that requires physical objects to then enter into the archive and then be digitized. There's modes and modalities like the post-custodial model that requires imaging and then actually giving the object back to the original owner. So then the provenance isn't the sticking point for what makes something into the what allows something to enter into the archive. And then it's also scale, like storage isn't no longer an issue besides digital storage, but that's like a little bit more flexible than trying to store a sign that's 12 feet long or something like that. You can image it and it's the same size as an image of the drawing that's the size of a postage stamp. So that's something that I hope archives continuously move towards that too, as just a way to sort of open things up and allow more voices in there.
Something that I love the question about sort of digitalness and adding to transness. Something I think about a lot is like the subtweet and other aspects of the genre that are like actually really sort of like a big space to move in. And so in part, I think in terms of archiving digital transness, we're reaching a point where people are writing in that space for that space in a way that's also meant to be collected. There's another poem in the anthology, Pink_Sissy from Joss Barton, who was a Tumblr contemporary and just writing contemporary Bryns that I like love Joss's work also. And I think Joss really writes in this voice that's both so of Tumblr or of like this our mediums, and also like has a beginning, is fully occupies that space and has like a beginning and end point in such a way that it's like easy to archive. So sorry to not have a great answer for that question, but I think this book actually does such a good job of archiving these writers who are very digital. And so take time to like expand in the book and see some of these other writers.
Yeah, something that I am like so excited about is that there are so many contributors who have said this is their first time being published in print, because a lot of them are like either coming from like ultra trans online spaces or just like online journals and stuff, and this is their first time in print. It just feels so special.
I was just gonna add a funny complication to thinking through archives and digitality, because so Ariel and I have been working with Robert Giard's archive, which is admittedly a visual archive of photography, and you know that archive is entirely online through Yale's digital collections archive, which you can search for, and it's how we actually did a lot of our research. But there are also, Giard was also very careful about permissions. So not everyone wanted to be visible through a project that, right, was identified through LGBTQ lenses. Some people were photographed before transitioning. And so our curatorial process in creating the show was to try and reach out to as many people as possible, make sure that they wanted this image to be seen. And we had people deny, and we actually had to go back to the estate and to people who were reproducing those images online initially to basically tell them that that the person who is in this image didn't want this image to be reproduced. And so that's just something that sort of complicates what happens, I think, in certain forms of digital archiving as well. But also, the archive is amazing at the same time. So it's complicated, I think.
I want to get quickly to another question. I'm scrolling back for it. This was from Ted. Where can we hide things for the people we love in the future to find? I think I want to hide it in as many places as possible, which is why I appreciate how many genres are represented in this, and how many places from which it was drawn. But yeah, I think, sneak it in everywhere, do interdisciplinary work.
Maybe this is a nice moment to drop some more links in the chat and just invite if there's any final thoughts or questions or comments, or this has really been like a love fest in so many ways. And I'm really incredibly grateful to Andrea and Kay for bringing this anthology into the world, for honoring all these writers, and for Sasha, Zach, Ellis, Gaines, everyone for coming and being part of this conversation. And part of what we're trying to do with the One Archives is also think about the gaps in the record, to confront the historical erasure of trans lives and histories. And this conversation has been so important, and it's being recorded, so you can share it with your friends. Maybe Andrea put the link one more time, so if you haven't gotten a copy of this book, you will. If you don't have the Lou Sullivan Diaries, you can read it in your holiday quarantine. It is absolutely perverted in the best possible way. And maybe we can all unmute and just like clap, and people can hang out and stay if they want to stay and chat. And really grateful to everyone for showing up today.
I guess I have one final comment. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so, I mean, I guess I'm not an archivist, and so I'm just like and I don't really work with archives, except kind of in one case. But I'm like a poet and whatever. And I think so. One thing that I'm thinking about a lot about right now is like Benjamin writing about the precious but tasteless seeds of revolution. And as sort of things that are like seeded into like books, among other things, like among other documents, and that are unearthed at different moments of like crisis and struggle. And I think that this is relevant, right? It's relevant for somebody like again, like Leslie Feinberg for like Stone Butch Blues, which is a book that's largely about shop floor struggles, as much as it's about other your bar being busted up by the pigs. It's also about like solidarity between like men and butches working in factories, right? And that it's important, it's like a book that is has a didactic point. It's about teaching people how not to scab. It's about teaching people what happened when in the middle of like deindustrialization, what happened to a lot of people, including queer people. And so I think this is like, when we think about, the archives, it's not just, and as everybody here, I think, knows kind of intimately, it's not just about like excavating something that's like hot and sexy and fun and weird and historically nerdy. It's actually like teaching each other. I think this goes to Ted's question. Like, it's teaching each other outside of a kind of like hegemonic, like fucking like frankly bourgeois or white supremacist, right? Education, teaching each other how life is lived and how transformations happened and how people formed resilient communities against the pressures and terrorism of the state and capital. That's very important. So I mean, to a certain extent, the kind of archival sections, if we had sort of been doing a slightly different project, that could have been much bigger, right? That could have involved a lot more research, and we weren't really doing that. We wanted to sort of sketch some of those links and put it together with kind of the present work. But I think there's more to do here. And I think that's so it's powerful work, it's important work. I'm really grateful to the people who are really doing it. And I think that there's a real continuity, again, to sort of the things that we're writing, and the other ways that we are operating in the present. And yeah, just like, thanks so much to everyone. This is badass.
I mean, we really didn't want to do the thing where it was like a bunch of like, 20 to 30 trans people like telling everyone how to have a revolution. We wanted to connect the dots between like past struggle and how a lot of those struggles are the same or they've shifted, and what are those strategies both on the street and on the page or on the stage. We wanted to bring that all together. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.